I took Apple on good faith because I'm not a reactionary. And I saw this idea of trying to squeeze all of the creative tools that we had or have into an iPad. So I didn't mind it, but a lot of people got upset for basically, I think, invalid reasons, because at the time that was not what Apple were trying to communicate. But like I say, I'm not a reactionary. But today, or yesterday, it is kind of salient. So this week, if it wasn't enough for a $3.3 trillion company, Apple have decided to tell Patreon that everybody who donates via the iOS app, got to make that distinction really clear, everybody who uses their apps on their platform have to pay 30% whenever they decide to donate to a Patreon creator. And so in response, Patreon have created this little news item to explain Apple's requirements they're about to hit and what do you need to know about this. And then you actually get this little mock-up of a dialog box, which is what I got when I logged into Patreon yesterday. Just to keep it brief, basically you get two options and it changes the price here. And it says recommended, maintain earnings and cover Apple's fee by increasing prices in the iOS app. So if something is $10 on the iOS store, well, now it's not, it's 30% more. But if you're on Android or on the open web, then it's just still $10. So you can select this. Guess who has to pay? You, if you love your creator. Or the alternative option is to keep the prices in the iOS app the same, but I, as the creator, will now take a 30% cut because Apple needs their 30%, not from Patreon, but from the creators. And what's really striking in all of this is that Patreon only take 8% and they host video, they host audio, they host images, they give you chat rooms for 8%. Ko-Fi, by the way, only do 5%. But Apple want Patreon to switch to their billing system, only the billing system. And Apple then say, well, now that we've told you to do this, you now owe us 30%, but not you, Patreon, the creators. So is that clear? Is that enough preamble before we get into this? Because it's so disappointing. And I'm really annoyed with Apple. And I do have a solution, so stick around for that. If you go to news.patreon.com, they actually give you a breakdown and they're trying to say that they want to be transparent, they want to give you control, and they want to give you stability. None of those things, if you dig deeper, are actually going to be granted to everybody. I mean, of course, there's going to be some upset, but there are ways that Patreon could mitigate a lot of this. And they're talking about Apple's requirements and then how to navigate Apple's fee. Again, there are some solutions here that they're not putting in. So if you go to the Patreon subreddit, they are talking about how kind of Patreon are okay with this themselves because they've been trying to move people off first of the month billing. And if you're not entirely sure what that means, basically Patreon will charge everybody at the beginning of the month. So effectively across the year, you've got this sort of heartbeat of financial transactions that are happening. And Patreon might not want that because that creates a lot of stress for them at the beginning of every month. And if they switch to Apple's system, it's just subscribe on whichever date you subscribed for, and then you get billed, obviously, 1 month later. So you've got this happy medium throughout the course of the month. This could benefit Patreon, but Patreon can hide behind the fact that they can say, oh, well, Apple is forcing us to do this, because Patreon in the past have messed around with creators. And this one might be another case of it. But you're not only are you up against Patreon, you're up against Apple as well. So besides navigating the fee and navigating Apple's billing requirements, they do give you an idea of the road forward. Now, as I said, if you dig deeper, Patreon kind of want this because I have 2 Patreon accounts. One of them is really old and I locked in and they only charge me 5%. On my newest account, for my Star Trek Voyager audio drama project, they get 8%, which doesn't seem like a lot, but for a company that wants to grow their wealth, it may do that. It may do that for them just as much as asking 30% from Apple, by Apple, again to someone else, will obviously grow their company as well because they've got 3.3 trillion. So please think of the companies that require 4 trillion and not do anything with that money. Just sit on it. I'm annoyed. People who donate to their favorite creators are annoyed. The creators are annoyed because this is highly disruptive to them. And the difference here with the first of the month billing, the heartbeat, as I gesticulated earlier, and just subscribing when you want to, is that a lot of creators, not myself, but a lot of creators want to be paid at the beginning of the month. It suits them. That was the whole point of Patreon in the first place because we get to control how we get paid and we define our rates as creators, okay? And it seems like Patreon wants to renege on that idea, which was the whole point of their company. Of course, I took to Twitter, where it's just screaming into the void, but Kenny went a little bit viral, and he says if you use the Patreon app on iOS and decide to donate to your favorite artist or developer, Apple will take 30% of your donation because because. And I want to share some of these reactions. So Armin writes, that's completely idiotic. So creators need to face a risk of losing potential supporters and just tell people to do it on the website. Amazing business decision, Apple. Screw you over the creators. More, why don't you? Do you remember this advert? In the beginning, I took Apple on good faith because I'm not a reactionary. And I saw this idea of trying to squeeze all of the creative tools that we had or have into an iPad. So I didn't mind it, but a lot of people got upset for basically, I think, invalid reasons, because at the time that was not what Apple were trying to communicate. But like I say, I'm not a reactionary. But today, or yesterday, it is kind of salient that you have this advert that exists, and it's from Apple, where they are trying to compress all of this creativity into what? They're crushing all the variations of how people want to earn money on Patreon and just trying to simplify it to suit them. Kenny and myself were kind of like-minded. It says, given the platform and how important it is for indies creators to be funded, it's just completely out of line for a 3.3 trillion company to just go, we want a piece of that. And importantly, for those that are old enough, Apple used to be the underdog. They were the ones that were championing the creators. Their platform, especially in the 90s, were to the crazy ones. All the crazy people who were gifted should be on our platform. Microsoft is the business platform, so you're not going to do anything on there of any worth, any value. Come to Apple, we'll look after you because we've got the tools. And they do have the tools, don't get me wrong. The barrier of entry seems to be getting higher, and then they pull something like this. Are they really for the creator now when they're trying to stiff creators? Not Patreon, by the way. They're not asking Patreon for 30%. They're asking people who donate to Patreon creators for 30%, or the creators for 30%. It's just wild that this is where they think they can make some more money, especially while they're being litigated against. Epic, who make Fortnite, Spotify, their podcast and music competitor, don't like them, and now they're going after Patreon. I mean, I know they've gone after some others as well, but interestingly with Patreon also is a resource or a repository, that's the R word, is a repository for podcasts as well. So I wonder what will happen in legal terms, how that will be viewed, because if you can't put your podcast on Spotify or Apple, then Patreon would be the next best place. There are a lot of creators on there who just who output only on Patreon. You got to think of like not safe for work kind of stuff. But now that you're using the billing system, they might even take out the not safe for work stuff. On Daring Fireball, they've covered it a bit, and I just want to share some of the headlines, but there's a lot of reading here. Let's just go back to the top. Patreon should consider calling Apple on its threats. Now again, this is only for iOS users. As I said, Patreon could want this, but Patreon, while they're trying to say, look, we're being clear with you, we don't want this, there are ways to get around this. One, don't offer any purchases via the app. Tell people to go to the website. I mean, that's what Netflix does. That's what Kindle does. Second option is get rid of the app and don't use the iOS store. Just make a beautiful web app. I have the app. In fact, I had the app. It's useless. There's nothing I can really function. There's no functionality to it. They could just get rid of the app. I bet they won't though. But John Gruber makes the point that Patreon should consider calling Apple out on its threats. Here we have this blurb. Patreon is home to an incredible range of creators. True. All with unique circumstances and billing needs. True. Apple's in-app purchasing system, on the other hand, only supports Patreon's subscription billing model. Apple has also made clear that if creators on Patreon continue to use unsupported billing models or disable transactions in the iOS app, we will be at risk of having the entire app removed from their app store. Good. Remove it then. And in my own little way of acting petty and to protest against this, it says on my $2 tier and my $5 tier, remember, the $3 trillion company want 30% of this. I say, please don't become a Patreon using the iOS app. Use the website directly with a browser. You will get charged 30% more because Apple wants to be Apple. And it's on both of them there. So we'll see what happens. I might get kicked off. I don't know. We'll see how strict Patreon are with their business model in conjunction with Apple. So John Gruber's argument is that they should just do that and see what happens. And he posits the theory that Patreon might come out better with regard to the publicity, the public backlash with removing their app from the App Store. His next article, creator platforms should be a special category on the App Store. Yeah, quite possibly. I think so. especially when you're dealing with small-time creators, someone in their bedroom. You're not dealing with Netflix, who has millions to make movies with. And even so, Netflix doesn't get charged 30% because they're special. Apple's requirement to hit creators and fans on Patreon. And if you go to the end point of this article here, I'm skimming a lot, but there's a lot to read if you're really interested. It says here, how do you put a price on the number of Patreon iOS users who are all by definition Apple customers? Remember that Apple are asking Apple iOS users to pay more, or the creator who uses Apple's iOS store for nothing, basically. There's hardly any activity on the app. They're asking them to pay more as well. So if you bought into Apple, 30% please. But if you're on Android, on the open web, you're a Windows user, you don't have to pay. So they're treating their own customers this way. But anyway, how do you put a price on the number of Patreon iOS users who are all by definition Apple customers, whose view of Apple will shift from Apple is a company that supports small indie creators and artists to Apple is a company that uses its position of power to extract exorbitant rent from small indie creators and artists because of this change. That's a wholly valid viewpoint to take because, as I said at the beginning of the video, I think I said it in the video, this is fair because Apple have increasingly made strides to upset practically everybody because they think they have a right to everybody else's money just because they use their payment platform. A payment platform, by the way, where MasterCard or Visa only charge 2 or 3%, Ko-Fi charges 5%, Patreon does 8% or 5%, and they say, boom, 30. Give us 30, please. Why? You don't host videos, you don't host podcasts, you don't host images. It's just a billing system. It should be like 5% tops. And I could understand at the beginning of the App Store's inception, you had to charge 30%. And in fact, everybody was okay with 30%. But the more they're trying to bring in to their billing system, they're trying to say, yeah, you still need to pay 30% as well. Why? The price should have gone down. I understand it's their platform, but it's not worth 30%. They're just trying to take a cut of everything. So they can actually get stuffed. Anyway, back to Kenny's post. Ashraf says, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't this the exact thing Epic took Apple to court for? Yes, it is. And if you don't remember that situation, and with Spotify as well, they were charging Epic and Spotify for 30%. But Spotify, for example, is a podcast company, and Apple is a podcast company. Oh, sorry, music companies. But Spotify have to raise their price to something that's 30% just to be on the App Store. Well, that's anti-competitive, isn't it? So that shouldn't be allowed at all. And then with Epic, Epic want to create their own things inside their own system and then sell those things. And Apple says, no, you've got to give us 30% for microtransactions. I mean, it's in the name, a microtransaction. So why don't you take a micro payment? Apple want 30% for everything. So you buy the game, boom, 30%. You want the skin that someone else made. Apple says, no, yeah, give us 30% for that as well. What? And it's only getting worse, especially if we allow Apple to do this. And most people will. So the next thing I'm going to say, I know I'm going to say it in the face of Apple's amazing profits that they'll make for, I don't know, for as long as I'm alive anyway, at least. And don't forget, I'll share all the links here in the show description down below. If Apple want their cut, then from now on, I'm going to cut Apple from me. And what I mean by that is I don't need to buy a new iPhone. There's a beautiful secondhand market in Hong Kong. I understand not all of you can do the same thing, but these are my circumstances. But I was going to buy the brand new iPhone 16, even a mid-range model. I don't need the all singing, all dancing. And at the moment, currently, the middle range is about 6,500 Hong Kong dollars. Boom. Apple have lost that. My Apple Watch is not on my wrist. It's charging again because the battery's dying. I was going to buy a brand new Apple Watch. I'm not doing it now. I'm going to get a battery replacement. Or, if anyone didn't know about this, you can get a Huawei Watch Fit 3. And it looks just like an Apple Watch. It acts just like an Apple Watch. And it's 1/4 the price. And the battery life is a month. Not 2 days, a month. And I've watched a lot of reviews. And from what I can tell, it's basically the same, except for sleep tracking. The Apple Watch is better at sleep tracking. But a lot of sleep experts say you shouldn't be overly focused on tracking your sleep anyway because it creates a negative feedback loop, and then you can't sleep properly anyway because you're stressing about the stats of what the device, it probably isn't recording properly anyway. So that's my next watch. I'm going to go secondhand for iPhones now. In fact, what I have with me right now is an 11, and I'm borrowing this because I broke my 10, and I used to have a 13. There is no difference functionally for what I need with iPhones. So I don't need a 16, and Apple have reinforced that fact. So I'm going to spend another $150. I'm going to give this back to my friend and just buy another iPhone 11 and just stay generations behind. This iPad is an iPad Pro 2020, secondhand already, by the way. And I have an iPad mini, secondhand already as well. So it's not a big deal for me to say, you know what, when this dies, I'm just going to buy the next iPad that is secondhand. But already the base iPad, the colorful one, that's like 2,000 Hong Kong dollars, that is on par with, in terms of processor, with this. And I only care about the processing power. I don't need anything better than the basic iPad right now. Now, of course, by the time this does die, maybe 2 or 3 years, I don't know, whatever comes out, that'll be on the used market. And no matter which iPad I pick, my third-party Apple Pencil will work. I don't need to play Apple's game of pick the right pencil. This is just a win-win-win for me. But I'm going to save loads now because I'm principled and I'm petty as. So no new iPhone, no new Apple Watch. I'll go third-party. I don't need the all singing, all dancing iPad. They are all capable of doing the work that I need it to do. And when it comes to the Mac, well, this is an M1 MacBook Pro, and we're just about to see the M4 versions. The market for M2 and M3, they're going to drop. So anything that's secondhand that falls down to what I want is going to be fine. I don't need Apple. And I've cancelled all my subscriptions as well already in protest against this. And again, I know it's like going against the grain because Apple are going to make so much money. But I tell you what, when it comes to me, they've lost money. They can get stuffed. And I hope they're happy with their 30% from people who are probably donating $2 each month. I really hope it's worth it for them. And I'm really annoyed with Apple. Now, some of you might say, well, why even stay on Apple anyway? Well, as I said at the beginning, they do make the tools. And I'm more than happy with the software that is available for the platform that I'm on. And I'm not just going to change everything over to a PC because I hate Windows anyway. And Linux, I don't have time for Linux. So I'm stuck on Windows, I'm stuck on Apple, but importantly, I'm going to squat on Apple's platform. And let's not forget Patreon, because as I said, they're probably using this situation to benefit as well. I've already signed up for Ko-Fi, and as I said before, they only take 5%, and I'm looking into using Ko-Fi from now on for my 2 channels. I won't tell any new people to sign up via the Patreon app. I'm going to tell them to sign up to Ko-Fi. As I said before, this only affects iOS users, and importantly, iOS users who sign up after November. So all my current Patreons are unaffected. But what happens a year from now? What other changes are going to be employed by Patreon or Apple? Disappointing news from Apple. I don't think Patreon is putting their best foot forward with trying to protect the creators. And I know that's a cynical take. They could do more than what they've put out. Maybe they're not being reactionary. And maybe they will do something later. They could say something. Jack Conte is personally sort of very much connected to his platform, and he says he's a creator himself. Where's that mindset? Where's that thinking of, you know what, I've got FU money. Yeah, Apple, okay, we're just going to pull the app. Everyone can just sign up via a web app from now on. Doesn't seem to be happening. People in the Discord and I've contacted them privately. Doesn't seem to be any movement on that front. So that's why I'm saying, they could do more, but they're not going to. So it'll be up to me. And it'll be up to other creators to take their ideas and creations forward onto something else. I'm going to get off the platform at some point, but I can't get off Apple's platform. So I'm just going to make the best of what I can do and just squat there, as I said. Thanks for watching, and you will see me in another video.